Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SoundOff Summit Digital Strategies presented by Music Calgary. My name is Audrey Niksic. I'm in a local band in Calgary here called Slut Prophet. I'm also a former radio host at CJSW. I'm just going to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and acknowledge that Mohkinstsis is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So we are going to get started here with our Q&A with our guest here, Glenn Alderson. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to get the viewers acquainted with your knowledge set?
Cool, yeah. My name's Glenn Alderson. In 2004, I started Beatroute Magazine, which is and was an arts and culture entertainment publication in Calgary. I started it right out of, I graduated from Mount Royal University in the communications program with a major in journalism. And throughout my time there, I was working as the arts editor for the student newspaper called The Reflector. And it was like, yeah, I did it for 3 years over the course of my studies. And over the course of the time, it was really awesome. And when it ended, I was like, oh, all of a sudden, all this cool stuff that I was doing with The Reflector, I couldn't do anymore. So I went to one of my instructors, a gentleman named Brad Sim, who was at the time he had been working with the Calgary Straight, which is like a sister publication to the Georgia Straight in Vancouver. And yeah, I knew he had like experience working in publishing, so I reached out to him and asked him if he wanted to help me start a magazine. So the two of us worked together to launch Beatroute, and I think I wrote my last exam in April of 2004, and then like that same day I went and like started trying to like hustle to sell ads into the print publication that we would then launch in June of 2004. And yeah, that was in Calgary, and I think the first issue was like the dudes on the cover, which, you know, whatever. And yeah, it was a really cool experience to sort of like start engaging in local arts and entertainment journalism at such a young age. After 5 years in Calgary, we expanded to into BC, and we launched a BC edition. I think it was just because like I was getting like, what's it called? Like FOMO, or like really super jealous of all my friends, like who would be like messaging me from all these amazing shows. And that's not to say Calgary doesn't have amazing shows, but like, I want to go out there and see what it's like. So we launched this BC edition, and I eventually moved out here to Vancouver. And I mean, that was like in 2009. And then for 10 years, we've been running Alberta and BC. And then in 2019, I think towards the end, we were acquired by the MRG Group, who owns like Dublin Calling and the Biltmore Cabaret and stuff like that. And yeah, we just sort of succumbed to that. And I ended up parting ways with the company about a month ago. So yeah, now I'm sort of in this place where when I left Beatroute, we had taken it to, it was like almost 17 years that I was with the brand / company. And but when I left it, it would evolved into a digital media company that was sort of global facing with like an emphasis on a very like US audience, and their intentions, I think, you know, remain the same. But I think my true passion is like in celebrating local arts and culture and music, especially in Canada, and sort of like helping position artists and explore the narratives around you know, emerging artists in Canada, and really like telling those stories for an international audience. So yeah, I'm currently working with a really great creative team on launching something new in June that I'm really excited to be sharing more information about soon. But it is it's called Range, and right now it's just right now you can sign up for the sign up list, but readrange.com is the website. And yeah, it's amplifying new voices in Canadian music. And here I am.
Well, congratulations on the new venture. That sounds very exciting.
Thank you.
And yes, so Colleen just noted here in the chat as well, but if there's any questions that you have at this time, you can also put them here in the Q&A chat function on Zoom for any people watching that may have questions. So I guess we'll just dive right into some listener questions.
Yeah, so like last week I did the panel with Ben Shapiro and Natalie Harmson. Ben Shapiro is a really good friend of mine who actually I met at like a press junket in Montreal back in like mid-2000, like 2010, I think. And we were both wearing like a Descendants shirt or something. Like we were both like, oh, huh. But we ended up getting to know each other really well. And he at the time had just founded Noisy Magazine, which was like the Vice offshoot celebrating music. And yeah, he's had a really cool career, you know, sort of going from like Noisy at Vice to like ended up working with like Spike Lee, and then he moved on to Spotify, where he was a community content programmer, and now he's working with Squarespace. And Natalie Harmson was is a freelance writer, and she worked a bunch with me when I was with Beatroute. So yeah, we had a really cool conversation. If anyone hasn't checked that out.
Yeah, it's up on the YouTube channel if anyone wants to check it out, but it was a really great conversation all about digital media there. Lots of interesting content, and people wanted to follow up with some of the stuff you were talking about. So we have some questions here about working with publicists in your experience, and if it is better to work with a publicist when trying to get your press coverage, or if it's easier to land pitching on your own.
Yeah, I mean, so that is a funny question, because I mean, the way it's sort of being asked is like as if yeah, like, so from my perspective as an editor or a publisher, is working with a publicist a must? I would say no. If anything, like, you know, one thing I do is work with publicists every day, and I have a really fantastic relationship with many publicists. The downfall is that my inbox is full of just like so many pitches. But what's great is when I get a unique pitch from somebody, and it's sort of, you know, it breathes this like unique air to it that's not like, hey Glenn, hope you're having a great Monday, I've got this band that I just think you'll love. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you do, but like every band you think I'll love. But you know, like when a band like really sort of like goes out and like writes their own press release and like, you know, puts in the work to tell their own story, I think that carries a lot of weight to it. And you know, but there are right and wrong ways to represent yourself. And I think there's a very like common misconceptions, especially with indie artists, where like, I don't, you know, it's not cool to represent yourself. And I think that sort of like way of thinking has changed, or definitely in my mind it has. So, you know, I also play in a band, and we've put out albums where we've worked with publicists, and then we just put out a 7-inch. We're called Needs. It's like a scrappy hardcore band, but like we put out the 7-inch about like, well, I think at the very beginning of the pandemic, and we opted to write the press release ourselves, and we got so much like great positive response through just like personal connections. And you know, I think there's a lot to be said about what it means to identify who you want to be writing about your music anyway, as opposed to like, you know, I get all these blanket pitches, but like I want someone, if they know that I personally, you know, that maybe I've written a bunch of stories about a couple other post-punk bands or indie bands or folk or rap like artists, like, you know, get to know the writer so that writer can best represent you. You know, and also don't just expect that they're going to write you back, because like you're not entitled to coverage. But I think that's the great thing about social media too, is it really tears that barrier down of, you know, the wall that was once standing in the way between you and media, which was, you know, you're your own publicist now, and you represent your own brand.
Do you have any like particular independent artists that you follow that you feel are like doing a really good job of putting out great press releases for themselves or great posts about, you know, their new album on Bandcamp or anything like that?
Yeah, like honestly, like even people like like everyone from like one person in particular, Yolanda Sargent, who is a member of Sargent and Comrade. She's so great at like really putting in the work to like stand behind her music and her artistry, and you know, that sort of confidence when she reaches out to me with a pitch that's like, you know, sort of tailored to me. I'm like, yeah, of course we're gonna write about you. Or like and Sincere is a rapper in Calgary who I absolutely love, and like you know, once she reached out to me with a press release, and as a result I've just kept like tabs on her career, you know, over the course, and just recently Complex named her as one of top 10 rappers in Canada to watch out for. So like, you know, there's that, but and you know, all the way up to like recently I've noticed like Dave Prowse, the drummer from Japan Droids, he's always like on Facebook promoting himself, or you know, sending out like things like, and Zach from the Zolas is another one that just recently comes to mind, is like they're not scared to promote themselves. And there's, you know, no matter what stage you're at, I don't think you have to stop hustling. So but it's really a matter of who do you want to reach and what's the story you want to tell.
I think that's a great point. And it kind of leads to another audience question here about getting your content to a wider audience using new companies like SubmitHub and the likes. If you're familiar with those kinds of services, if you want to touch a little bit about what that is, and also if there's value to using resources like that to get your stuff out to a wider audience.
So that's super interesting. I didn't really expect to be answering a question like that, but I'm actually personally interested in this as sort of a form of like content curation, I guess you could say. So I can answer you from a digital media publishing side of things. And like what I would say about SubmitHub is that, well, it's kind of annoying because if you like, so let's say like if I put, when I was working with Beatroute, if I signed Beatroute up as a content curator or whatever you want to call, whatever they call it on SubmitHub, the way that system structures in workplace, like, or how it works for anyone who doesn't know, is like artists pay. It's a pay to play model. You pay, you submit a song. It's like not much either, like 50 cents. Or is it $1? What is, do you know, Audrey? Have you
I
used it?
am not sure. We'll say 50 cents to $1 range.
Yeah. So, but I do know, like, you can make as a curator, a content, you know, person like Beatroute would make 50 cents to $1.50 for every post that they approve. And then by approving it, like you have to listen to like at least a minute of the song, like not even the whole song. You don't even have to read the press release or know anything about the band, but you can go through and be like, oh yeah, like cool, I like that, I like that, I like that. And you can agree to add it to a Spotify playlist, or you can agree to write a feature, depending how much lifting you really want to do around the artist. Through my experience of it, it's like we made like, you know, $50 or something, but you could make a lot if you were very dedicated to just going through all of the submissions and keeping your sort of profile active and in good standing. But like, yeah, it doesn't seem like a very authentic thing to me. Like I've also used it from a band perspective where, you know, I'm just like, okay, I have a $20 in credits, and then I go through and I'm like, who are the punk bands, or like who are the punk like curators, like, and then you send it to them, and if they approve it, like they don't have to approve it either, you know. So again, you're not entitled to coverage just because you paid your dollar or whatever. You know, and the few people that accept it is like, okay, yeah, cool, we put it on our Spotify playlist. And then you realize that 40,000 new songs a day are uploaded to Spotify, and you're just like, it's just sort of gets lost in the noise. But there are merits to it, of course. And like, I think you have to just explore all of the different ways that you can be interacting with people. And again, I think it comes down to on SubmitHub, if you see a thing like a curator that particularly resonates with, you think it resonates with your band or brand or whatever it is you're trying to get out there, like maybe take that extra step and reach out to them through another channel. But yeah, I do know that you can, like, I do have a friend who sort of presented to me this really cool model. He worked at the Berkeley Music College, and he presented this really cool model of how to monetize your Spotify channel through, Tone Den, and then you go on Tone Den and you get a bunch of followers, and then eventually, you sign up to SubmitHub, you build your status as a curator, and you can actually make quite a bit of money doing it. But it's a side hustle for sure.
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of like time and energy to get to that kind of place, because like you were saying, I feel like Spotify is very much like a place with those curated playlists and things where things are getting added every day, so many different artists, so many different playlists, so sometimes it gets a little bit lost in the mix at times, which I think is why it's important, like you and Benjamin and Natalie were talking about on Monday, about kind of building up the hyper local community there too, and like really establishing yourself in your local communities. And that's why things like your new venture are so important, to build up like local recognition for new and upcoming artists. So
yeah, that's exactly it. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, you really do have to communicate to somebody, and your vision and like your sort of your narrative needs to be concise. And I don't know, like, it's so funny, bands of like, even my band like has been guilty of this. You put out a record and you're like, all right, now we can just sit back and watch the streams come in. But is of course not like that. You're like, even if you end up like, when on the last full length that we put out on File Under Music, it was like we made it on the new punk playlist, which is a pretty great thing, like that Spotify can be the gatekeeper of this like magical playlist where all of a sudden you go from having 100 followers to like 1,000 or 2,000 in 1 month. But it really does taper off, and it's like, how do you use that momentum or energy to like to carry yourself forward?
for sure. And we just have a listener here who is just wanting to hear a little bit more detail about some of the places we just listed, like SubmitHub. And if you wanted to just repeat one more time the one that your friend recommended you, and I
Oh,
can.
totally. Yeah. So yeah, SubmitHub is worth looking into. And like, I don't know if the person is an artist or, yeah, must be. But so as an artist, you sign up and you can buy credits, and then you search the curator list, and you can like submit your songs for consideration of like playlist inclusion or editorial coverage. I think most of them are like bloggers and like, Spotify playlist or YouTube playlist curators. What we were doing at Beatroute too is like using SubmitHub to get new tracks and use that to populate a swim lane of new music releases. And it was cool because I actually, through that, now that I'm thinking about, I did learn about some pretty cool new like indie bands. Like, I learned this Boy Pablo band who I'd never really listened to. And I noticed that a lot of publicists are starting to use that to try to squeak in through a different channels as well. And then to promote it, or like to try and amplify your stuff. Like, I really think it's like, you as a band now, especially now that like we can't perform, you have to like put in the research, which like sucks, to like do the digital marketing stuff. And like, the guy at File Under Music is this guy, Steve Mann. He is amazing. He worked with my band when we were on File Under Music. The label since closed shop or whatever you call it. But File Under Music was an awesome label, and Steve Mann was such a hardworking like digital strategist, always working behind the scenes to like try and learn the sort of intricacies of the music industry. And you can actually follow him if you want to put him in the chat. He just moved on to start a digital strategy company. On Twitter, his name is Mucky Man, MuckyMann. And yeah, he's a great dude. Um, and yeah, so like the digital strategy though, like you can also learn it yourself. Obviously, you can learn anything now on YouTube. But it is a bit complex. And so there's this one, Facebook business smart, business.facebook. You can learn to like create campaigns that target people according to like other bands that, maybe bigger bands that your band you feels like you align with. And then also by like geography. So like if you wanted to target just Calgary artists or Calgary fans, like then you can choose that. Obviously, I think most people maybe know that now, and then Tone Den is a really cool tool to use that helps you sort of manage but amplify your marketing strategies through Facebook and Instagram. And oh yeah, I guess while talking about that, I think a really important thing to talk about is using social media properly. Like Instagram, it's crazy, but like, you really have to like feed that beast, like putting in the work as much as it may suck sometimes, like posting grid posts to like keep an active presence and interact with your audience. And like I think it's pretty common practice that you should have like, not should, but you might want to try having at least one grid post and like 3 stories a day. And following liking comments and really like engaging with your audience, because that's what people love. Like also imagine if you commented on like Phoebe Bridgers like Instagram page and then she commented back, you would probably be so stoked. So
Do you have any advice for like people in bands who are maybe not super used to like social media promotion, and maybe like how to get started or the best way to like start building that presence online?
yeah, like honestly, I think the best thing about being a band is it's supposed to be fun, right? So like you really want to like when I'm at band practice, it's more like I'm just hanging out with my 4 best friends. So like we're going on a bike ride this afternoon, so we'll probably use that like as an opportunity to take some like videos for Instagram, but like using it like to get on it, just sign up. And then I think a lot of people are maybe still reluctant to explore TikTok because for all the right reasons. It's so intimidating and obnoxious all at the same time. But I think some people are using that tool with great success. And if you can find a way, one thing I think is cool and it really helps me is I look at other people. You have to wade through the shit, obviously, to get to it. But like, find other people that you like and look up to and respect and see what they're doing that you like. Create a little mental social media mood board of like how it is you want to, present yourself. And then, it's funny, but like publicists or media outlets aside, like people pay attention to that stuff. And like, maybe you don't even need to try to get the attention of, the editor at the magazine that hasn't returned your last 10 emails, but like maybe eventually, if you're like, have this like honest, pure aesthetic of like, we're just a fun band and like, fuck you, we don't need anyone else. Like, then all of a sudden people want to be a part of this brand and aesthetic that you've created because it's real.
Absolutely. And like building on that idea of a brand too, I've noticed like a lot of bands recently have had to kind of switch gears a bit since there's not a lot of live music going on, obviously. And I just noticed the other day that Shannon and the Clams just released a Patreon subscription channel with like, unreleased music, or like they made a karaoke section and unreleased videos and photos and things. Do you think that's something that like self-represented artists and like, more local bands that are getting started could benefit from? To catch the eyes of publicists and audience members alike?
Yeah, totally. That's a really good point, actually. And like also, in that same like sort of way of thinking, like Substack, like for newsletters, you can sort of set up the same paid newsletter subscription service. And I have a friend in LA. Her name is Cecilia Della Peruti. She's the singer of a band called Gothic Tropic. And she like even started an OnlyFans page that like is kind of funny. Like, you know, I don't think OnlyFans just has to be like sexy, scandalous stuff, but like she uses it as a platform to release new singles and sort of generate interest um, from a whole other, you know, because you kind of got to think of it as like all these different platforms attract different users, right? Like when you think about how do you communicate over Twitter versus how do you communicate over Facebook, which you don't really anymore, right? And you know, OnlyFans, TikTok, like there's so, you know, even Clubhouse now, you know, like if you, you know, be in a, like make yourself an authority. I think one thing that it could be really cool is using like this new technologies, you know, and really like showing people that you know how to use it. You know, even like for an example, like on Clubhouse, if a band were to like take the initiative to host a panel or something, you know, and like engage with other bands and talk about like, how are you managing this weird time of not playing live? Or, you know, just like I was part of a Vancouver music panel on Clubhouse a few weeks ago, and it was just like the first time that I felt like amongst peers, you know, and it really helped normalize just this like feeling of like hopelessness. But by the end of it all, it was like, oh no, the community's still here. Like we just gotta sort of wade through this time and make sure that we all still stay connected. But yeah, hopefully that answered.
No, that absolutely answered the question. And yeah, I think it's just really important to build that digital presence, but I still want to switch gears a little bit too and talk about the idea of still like maintaining, I guess, like a more physical presence. And there's an audience member who was curious about the difference between like digital online stores and having physical merch, and if there's a better choice for that, especially right now too, I think, since at least for most local bands, I think merch sales are mostly reliant on live shows and stuff. But do you think there's a benefit to having like digital stores for merch as well, not just for music content?
Yeah, like, well, again, it's like, do you even bother pressing a record right now? Because how would you sell it? And like, that's sort of the thing where, you know, when I get, this is not really a digital editor publisher question, but like, I feel like from a band perspective, like when I was stuck with, you know, the 200, what I printed like 207 inches, and it was like, oh shit, now we can't play any shows. But like, everyone in my band sort of hustled and we're like, yo, like, we just put out the 7-inch. Like, if you want to buy it, we'll come deliver it to you. That was cool. And then for like, to answer the question about digital merch, it's really interesting to think about what is available to artists now, like through, you know, like online merch stores, like offering solutions for independent musicians. Like you really don't have to print 100 shirts anymore. Those days are kind of over. And yeah, you sacrifice a little bit of profit, but like there's, you know, there's also companies that are set up specifically for bands so they print your merch for you, ship it out, and send you the, you know, what your chunk of the pie. But it's weird, like, I don't know, it's something about that just feels weird and inauthentic. But if it works for you, it works for you. Personally, for merch, I'm just like, yeah, I'd rather buy it direct from the artist.
Me as well, but there's lots of options out there for sure. And yeah, let's switch gears a little bit to maybe talk more about publishing and your work with Beatroute and your new adventures here too. We were chatting a bit before the Q&A started about your university days with the dark room. If you want to expand on that and just maybe talk about how, I guess, your role has changed since you graduated and as things have become more digital.
Yeah, so I mean, what we were talking about is how like when I was in school, like I'm not even that old, but my journalism class was the last year to get taught how to use the dark room, which is like, it makes me laugh now thinking back about the time spent like developing film and then and photos. But you know, the pace of like evolution of journalism has changed so fast that like you could even like I had a conversation the other day with this guy named Thor, who was a host on breakfast television at City TV in Vancouver, and then they got laid off and whatever. Now now Vancouver watches the Toronto newscast, but he now works for this Vancouver is Awesome, which is owned by Glacier Media, and he's his own cameraman. And like, I just think that's so funny that he had to go from like in front of the camera to not only behind the camera, and then he edits the stories. And it was like very like, it's such an accurate representation of what the state of things are, where you have to teach yourself. If you're a band, you got to learn the digital marketing. You got to, if you're, a journalist, you have to learn how to communicate and what tools, are best, again, to tell your stories. And, I think there is a very strong future in, things that I never learned when I was in journalism school, but like talking about newsletters, talking about digital communication in different ways. Even like, employing like things like TikTok. There, a lot of credible news sources are using TikTok. And at some point you just have to not resist. And then again, to content discovery, I've learned about quite a few artists that are making some really, really cool music through those platforms. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is just about like staying flexible and wearing many hats and just like learning as many skills as you can in order to like better adapt to all these changes.
Yeah, and writing, reading other, again, like, as same with the band, if you're trying to be like, want to be successful, find inspiration. But if you want to, as a journalist, read other like media content and to like decide for yourself what it is you like.
Absolutely. And then an attendee here today too also wanted to know about some of your favorite newsletters to follow for music content.
That's really, it's so like personal and specific, right? But I think like so many journalists are doing it nowadays. One that I just followed recently and I really love is Cadence Weapons newsletter. He had it's set up through Substack, and if for anyone who doesn't know Cadence Weapon, he's originally from Edmonton. He's a rapper named Roland Pemberton. Rolly, and yeah, he writes these really cool personal essays that also sort of double down as like a way to promote his music. He's got a new record coming out. He's also a DJ. It's very like, yeah, and he's a journalist. So like, it's just so cool to read his perspective on music and this current state of the world. Yeah, there's so many. It's like, yeah, newsletters.
Pro newsletters. Perfect. And yeah, audience members can keep asking questions in the Q&A function if they want to, but we have another question kind of relating to the print market here in Canada. I'm sure you can touch a little bit about that and I guess the relevancy of print, particularly in the Canadian market nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking in relation to the pandemic, or are you talking about in relation to like in a post-pandemic world? It's so hard, like, to answer that question. At the beginning of COVID, obviously, I mean, Beatroute, when I was with them, made the decision that it wasn't really doing anyone any good distributing print materials around, when like it kind of made shop owners, like, the boutique shops that we were distributing to and copy shops and record stores, like, uncomfortable. And I'm talking like even before that, doing print is a real grind where, we were doing this model where it'd be like we printed, 10,000 copies and just like hired a distribution team to distribute them around the city. And it's like, here, take our magazine, like take our and it was like kind of this weird entitled approach of like, don't you want this? Like, we put all this work into this magazine, but like the way, I figured this out, especially when we were expanding into Toronto, people just don't have that infrastructure built in anymore of like, there's, it's very, not sterile, but like the way that the sort of the shops are built now, they're streamlined and they don't have a place for racks like they did in the 90s. So like, yeah, you have to, I think, yes, print is relevant, to answer the question straight off, but I think the print strategies need to evolve like everything else. And I've seen some really cool magazines out of the UK that are doing it in a way that's like exciting, and they also live online. Like, so for instance, there's this one called So Young. Colleen maybe can put it in the chat when she finds it, but So Young magazine, what they do is it's sort of like a subscription-based model where they'll print copies of it and then mail it out to people. And but you can also, when you buy a subscription, you can also read it through like an online platform, which I think is like called Yumpu, which is a very weird name, YUMPU. And they host like thousands and thousands and thousands of publications on there. But it's just nice to sort of see, like, you know, that's because there's like a print aesthetic. You can make the same argument for why vinyl records are cool, like because it's just bigger and you have the insert, or, you know, like I'm even right next to me here, I have this like Spin magazine from 1977 with Edie Brickell on it, and it's just like, this is such a, like, if you think about it as an artifact, that's so cool. And I hang on to magazines, you know, and I think like even Kanye, when he put out like Yeezy season 3, like came with a zine, and like those zines were so sought after that they were like selling like on the dark web for thousands of dollars. But yeah, so there is still a thirst for print, I think, and, you know, the people do want something physical, tactile to hold. But that old model of like print distribution, like where you just go and dump magazines, I don't think it works, because, yeah, well, especially in this day and age, but you know, in a post-COVID era, I think still you have to be a little bit more like methodical and like sensitive to the environment that you are injecting yourself into.
Absolutely. It's an interesting thing to think about going forward too, especially, yeah, just like being able to like physically like pick up something that's been on a rack might be a little bit different post-COVID. And what you were saying too got me thinking about like zine culture with bands as well. Do you know any music zines that you like following that bands have put out or labels have put out?
Well, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but like, so I was just thinking about how that, like, remember there was that bench at the Ship and Anchor that had like all of the magazines, like such a mess all the time.
Stacks on stacks.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, like when my band would go on tour, that was sort of like the first thing I would always go to, is like, where's the local alt weekly, you know, just to like see what they were doing. Maybe that's because I was publishing a magazine at the time. I wanted to see what other people were doing, but yeah, it's still, you know, yeah, it's relevant in a different way. And yeah, other people doing other things, like are you talking about print?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that So Young magazine is pretty cool. I think there's another one called Dork that I really like out of the UK. They're sort of like, they're just like interesting discovery publications. And what I love about them is they're doing this thing where they're elevating UK culture, UK music culture, in a way that's, you know, again, positioned so it can be digested by an international audience without alienating them. And yeah, it's funny because even the way that you tell stories now, it's like I've been really like having this conversation internally with the people I'm working with on Range about, like, there's no yeah, like just making it sort of like not so like around an album release, but around like the personality of the artist. Yeah, so you're not like, you could read the story about a band from Calgary in Montreal, and somehow it would resonate with you.
Can you give any of the audience members a little like hint about what's to come with Range as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, so we're launching on June 1st, and right now I've got like this really cool team of editors and writers working. We're generating a bunch of content leading up to the launch. I really want to make sure it's a mix of like emerging voices across, you know, and sort of lifting those up alongside, like, I guess you could call them like industry pioneers, or, you know, people who are already established in music. So like that way, when we write a story about sun glaciers and we put them next to Rex Orange County, it's sort of like, you know, it helps sort of, you know, put them on the same playing field. And because both bands are awesome and like, you know, deserve to be heard. Some people maybe in Montreal just haven't heard of Sun Glaciers yet, but they will one day. Is that a good example? I'm trying to talk Calgary to you here. And then, yeah, sorry, what did you ask though? Oh, like
just what to expect from Range in the future. Yeah.
Well, we're also doing this really cool like live interview series that I'm pretty excited about pulling together, where we're using Twitch as a platform to invite emerging voices on and tell their stories, and yeah, just sort of like engage in a narrative that sort of unfolds naturally, and yeah, positions them again for, you know, so we can show, like, what I love about Twitch is it's such a funny platform, because you go on it and there's so much shit, like garbage. Like, it's like the other day I saw there's one stream of a girl just petting a horse in a stable, and there was like 20,000 people watching her. And then in the same breath, there's like all the nerds gaming, which like respect the gamers, and then there's like girls like lying like poolside in their bikinis. Like, what is this? But what's great is that the platform is so, you know, broad that you can use it for like interview format stuff. And I think Complex actually does some really cool things where they'll like invite beat makers to have like beat competitions, and you know, they'll have a host interviewing DJs that, you know, you would never really expect to see just chatting, I think they call it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring that as a one of the many different verticals of the platform. But artist interviews, reviews, premieres, and like, you know, op-eds, and really like some sort of like cultural dissections of like what's going on in the music industry, while also, you know, and then there's this other side to it where we're like you know, really putting an active energy into helping to, you know, make sure that we're not just doing the like going, I wouldn't call it lazy, but like working just with publicists, but working with the bands, maybe, you know, maybe underrepresented groups of any stature that maybe don't have publicists or the resources to get a publicist, and then you know, doing that extra bit of digging so we can like tell the real like story of what culture looks like in Canada, you know, let's say as a whole, but again, positioning it for both a Canadian and an international audience.
Amazing. I love that. And it sounds super exciting. If you wanted to also follow it for any of the audience members watching, there is a link at the top of the chat to readrange.com to stay tuned for the launch of that as well.
Yeah, and you can sign up for the newsletter to stay up to date. And like, we also have an Instagram, which is read.range.
Perfect. And then we have about 10 minutes left. If any other audience members have some questions that they are itching to ask, they can put them in the Q&A box here. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about in particular, kind of as like a 10-minute closing remark here, Glenn, or do you want to ask some more questions, get some more questions answered?
No, I'm good. But if you have any other questions, happy to answer them.
I was thinking when you were talking just about your experience like dropping off print and stuff like in Toronto, for example, with like the more streamlined stores and things like that. Do you notice any other differences in the, I guess, market of print and publishing between some of the different like major Canadian cities?
Yeah, that's a cool question actually, because so when I went to Toronto, I was like, I'm very like Western Canadian, like born in Calgary, been living in Vancouver for 10 years. And so when I went to Toronto, it was very much like, I'd only ever been there for North by Northeast before. And then it was only in the last 2 years before the pandemic that I was spending more and more time there. And I was trying to work with some like friends of mine on the ground in Toronto to build out a really solid print distribution strategy. But it was wild, like how different Toronto is from Calgary and how different Calgary is from Vancouver. And like every city sort of has its own pulse and like whatever. But in Toronto, it was like what worked in Vancouver for me in the print world didn't necessarily work in Toronto. And like we would walk around some of the major commercial areas, whether it was like Queen Street or Spadina or Dundas, and it was like all of these exclaim boxes, for an example, they were just like filled with garbage. Like and then we would like do this weird thing where we'd ask people who we thought maybe were skewed a little bit younger demographic and be like, do you know what this is? And they're like, I don't know, a phone box or something. Like some people don't even like the physical street boxes. Some people didn't even know what they were, which is really funny because like that is a real telling sign of like, okay, well, the print distribution strategy needs to be rethought if it is going to exist in this current state of the world. But yeah, and then just hustling like to get it in places. It seems like it's such a like a, I hate to sound hopeless, but it feels like such a hopeless endeavor sometimes. You go to a place and they're like, yeah, we'll take 2 or 3 copies. And then they literally either get thrown out or covered up by a weekly, if you're putting out a monthly like we were. It's like you'd have to be hitting those like same routes all the time. But that's why it's like there's so many, what's cool I guess about now, even though it's a bit daunting, but like there's so many different ways to communicate and tell those stories, and there's no reason why you can't with a digital version of the same print publication. You can really like help, if you hone in on your digital marketing strategies, you can be finding out like, okay, we have an article on this band, like they sound a little bit like the Strokes or a little bit like Blink-182, so like let's feed it to those fans, and you might be pleasantly surprised of like what new readers or new fans that your band, brand, or business acquire.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about making things that are very like local or very Canadian more accessible to a wider audience too, by making those connections between like like sounds like similar bands that they may sound like and stuff. Is there any ways that Range in particular is going to work to kind of bridge that audience between like international and Canadian audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our editors is actually based in Argentina, which is cool. He's in Buenos Aires. So, we've already sort of got that international lens, but again, our focus is very much on focusing to amplify and elevate Canadian voices. But yeah, that's it's sort of, it's just every day is like evolving, and in terms of what tools are available, and it's fun to explore which ones work for you and which ones maybe don't necessarily resonate.
Are there any tools in particular that you want to share that have worked for you or haven't worked for you while developing Range?
Well, what I do love is like obviously like the sort of like content management platforms that we've been using, like Asana is super helpful, and Slack, I don't know, just for communicating with team members and like really cutting down on the number of emails that you get. I have like 3 different Slack channels going, and like one of them is very much, it's even just for my bandmates and I to communicate, because like Facebook Messenger is a bit of a mess. But this, like when you use Slack, it really helps you organize like album release, like recording, like touring, stuff like that. What about you?
We tend to use just like Google Drive and stuff in my own band and my own experiences, because I think communication and organization is like the key to being able to have like a clear mind to get the creative juices flowing. So yeah, I am not familiar with Asana. If you wanted to speak a little bit more about that, maybe some other audience members are unfamiliar with it as well. But yeah, I'm a pretty old school like Google Drive type of lady.
Well, also, first of all, shout out to your band, Selfrepresented, right?
Thank you.
Drop that Bandcamp link in there. Yeah, Asana is just a project management software, like for full transparency amongst team members. So if you're like working on a story, it's like, what stage of the process is it in? And then anyone can sort of check in. Especially good for when you're working on deadlines, to sort of say like, all right, these are the tasks that still need to be completed to get to the next step of where we need to be. But yeah, Google Drive is great for, file sharing too, and text messaging. You guys do that?
Yeah, nice little texting group chat. WhatsApp as well is really nice for when you're
phone
in
calls.
the same place.
Pick up the phone, call somebody.
Carrier pigeon.
Love that.
All of the good stuff. Yeah, if there's any other last minute questions here that the audience also wants to get into Glenn before he goes off on his bike ride today, that does sound very nice.
I forgot about that. Yeah. Bike ride.
All right.
So what are you gonna do with your band? Are you gonna play any shows, like, or have you done any live streams or anything? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, we're currently, I guess it's like, yeah, interesting. We took a little bit of a break to just wrap our heads around the situation, obviously. But one thing that I thought was really cool, back when restrictions were a little bit less tight here in Calgary, there was a lot of DJ events, which were really nice. I think DJing is a good way to like introduce yourself to new music as well. And like if there's a band that you really like, I think it's cool as like an audience member to like check out the band's DJ set or like, their playlist on Spotify or something like that too. That's one way I like to find new music, is through those kind of like platforms and avenues, I guess. Like I think it's always interesting when a band has a Spotify account and they make playlists of the music that they like to listen to and stuff like that too.
You have a playlist up on yours?
I don't have a playlist up on mine. I have a lot of playlists for my radio show at CJSW, but there's a couple like Canadian bands that have some nice Spotifys that I like to check out at times.
Cool. What's your radio show called?
My radio show is called Fender Bender.
Great name.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on 4 to 6 p.m., but I just finished my last episode last week, but that's okay.
Forever?
Just for a little bit. I'm just starting a new job.
Oh, cool. Well, that's
anymore.
Great. And yeah, I agree though. Bands who make playlists are very cool. Like I know Courtney Barnett had a pretty cool like emerging Australian artists playlist that I followed for a while and learned about so many cool Australian bands. And I think that's sort of like, coming back to the sort of think local, act global thing where I think that's actually a Destroyer lyric. Where you sort of are representing your community. And like I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine the other day about this sort of COVID era and how, even you and I talking right now, you are in Calgary and I'm in Vancouver, but for all that, for whatever it matters, you could be down the block and we could be Skyping or whatever. But like having that sort of like digital, geographical differencing, walls torn down, how, maybe it's really important that we celebrate the geographical differences of like what makes a Calgary music community, and what makes the Saskatoon punk scene, special. And like how, sort of like, I remember I even just got a press release the other day about a band Moncton who did this like really cool project that brought the whole community together of like all these different Moncton or New Brunswick or East Coast bands doing Ramones covers, and then they put out a release, a compilation on Bandcamp, and it was like, yeah, that really helped put Moncton sort of in my mind as like, yeah, oh yeah, there's an East Coast music scene. I almost forgot about that because everything is just so like flatline. It exists, but you can, celebrate local communities when you can, and that's really the one thing that will sort of help keep it. I don't know, adds like a unique, fresh angle for people, because otherwise, like, I don't know about you, but I find the consumption of new music and new content just very overwhelming and sometimes anxiety inducing. Like, when you're looking at, like, if I'm scrolling through my inbox and I, a couple hours into the day, and it's already like 100 press releases. Like, how am I supposed to filter through this? Like, there's an element of content curation, but then there's such a thing as overload too.
Absolutely. I feel similar ways sometimes. And yeah, I think like even recently I've been getting really into looking at the Australian music community, just because like they're doing shows right now. So then you can just kind of check out what they're doing through live streams and things like that. And then just like you start out with one band and you can just build and find so many other bands by just starting at the one point of access. So
what I was going to ask you, have you heard this band called Hexdet?
Hexdet, yes, I have. They're from Edmonton, aren't they?
No, they're from Melbourne. Just because you were talking about Australian music, wasn't trying to put you on the spot, but they're they're a really awesome like feminist punk band. That if you haven't checked them out, knowing like what I know about Slut Prophet, I think you might really like them.
Oh, thank you for the rec. I think I was thinking about a band called Hexbeat.
That's true. Hexbeat is
from Edmonton.
Edmonton's got some really great bands too.
Is there any other artists that you're listening to right now that you want to give a shout out to?
I really like the new Lil Nas X song. Joking. Well, I'm not joking. It is pretty strangely, like it's one of those like earworm ones where you just like can't get it out of your head. The new Justin Bieber song, Peaches, I like to put that on repeat. There's a good YouTube video that just plays it streaming for an hour on repeat. No.
There's something really fun about pop music sometimes. I always say that. I think it's hardest to write a catchy pop song.
Yeah, totally. Actually, I also like still have this like what's the word, like a conspiracy theory that in every like really successful pop song there's like some subliminal messaging in it, like that, like the record industry exec people have like put into the song to make you want to listen to it over and over again. I don't know how they built that technology, but it's got to exist.
It's working.
But no, I do make like new music playlists all the time. It's just so weird to like, again, with the abundance of new music, to just shout something out. But I like every Friday, I like to like make a post that's like, these are the 5 singles that really resonated with me in the last week. And like, yeah, I post that stuff on the Range account. And if you follow in the Spotify too, there's I have like 3 playlists. One is like a punk playlist, one's a new music playlist, and then the other one is just I don't know, some bullshit.
Alrighty, I think with that we can probably conclude our Q&A, but I want to thank you again for joining us, and thank the audience for joining us too. This will be out on YouTube again later if you want to revisit it. And also stay tuned for the next 4 weeks ahead here.
Totally.
The rest of SoundOff Summit. Thanks so much, Glenn. Is there anything else you want to say before we say goodbye?
No, it was just so nice to meet you, and like thank you very much to you and to Music Calgary for inviting me to be a part of this. I think you guys are really uncovering some super cool conversations and content strategies around just like digital everything, and I look forward to being an attendee on all the future ones.
Awesome, me as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Audrey.